Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere quiet, somewhere ancient, where the moonlight slips through olive branches and the only sound is the soft burble of water lapping against stone. You're walking along a forgotten forest trail in central Greece. It's misty, still, and smells faintly of crushed thyme and damp earth. The air feels heavy in that oddly comforting way, like the world's about to confess something to you if you just listen close enough. And then, ahead, there it is, a small, glassy pond. Totally still, you crouch beside it, peer down, and see yourself, kind of, but not really. The reflection shimmers, changes. A figure flickers into view, young, impossibly handsome, golden curls tousled just right. He's not you. He's Narcissus. And you're about to spend the next several hours watching him do something painfully relatable. Fall in love with someone who can't love him back. You probably won't survive this, especially if you've ever had a situationship with your own selfie cam. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always read the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie back in the tall grass beside the pond, and the story unfurls. Long before this moment, long before the tragic puddle. Romance. Narcissus was already the subject of chatter among mortals and immortals alike. This wasn't just some good-looking dude, he was the good-looking dude. The one who could make even a goddess do a double take. His name was whispered around Boeotia the way people whisper the name of that one coworker who's somehow both dreamy and insufferable. He had that classic Greek profile, straight nose, chin like it was carved out of Olympus marble, and eyes that looked like they'd been stolen from a moody painting. And unlike modern beauty, which changes every 3 months on TikTok, Greek aesthetics were painfully specific. Symmetry meant virtue. Radiance meant favor from the gods. Looking a little off? That meant maybe you were cursed. Or worse, barbarian. But here's the twist. Narcissus never really used his good looks. He wasn't out chasing nymphs or hosting toga parties with ambrosia cocktails. In fact, he mostly kept to himself, hunted in the woods, listened to birds, smelled flowers, ignored people. You know, a soft boy in the truest Hellenic sense. And yet, everyone wanted a piece of him. Not just because he was hot, but because he was unavailable. The Greeks were suckers for a good chase, and Narcissus was basically the original emotionally unavailable heartthrob. You sit up slightly, listening to the rustling leaves and distant hoot of an owl. A breeze passes through the trees, and you almost expect him to step out right now. Eyes half-lidded, hair perfectly tousled without trying. Now here's a fact the myths don't emphasize much, but it's fun. Narcissus' name is connected to the Greek word narc, meaning numbness or sleep. Yep, narcotics. The flower he turns into. The narcissus, or daffodil, is mildly toxic and was actually used medicinally to dull pain. So the story has layers from the very beginning. Beauty, sleep, a hint of death. According to one version, probably the one told around drowsy fire pits by drunk philosophers, his mother, Liripe, was a river nymph who had a brief and entirely unsupervised fling with the river god Cephissus. She gave birth to this luminous boy and, being a concerned nymph mom, took him to a blind prophet named Tiresias. And this is where things get very Greek. Tiresas, who, by the way, had already lived as both a man and a woman because of some unfortunate snake-related business, told her he'll live a long life if he never knows himself. And you just know that's not going to end well. Historians still argue whether this prophecy was a metaphor for sexual innocence, psychological self-awareness, or just really bad parenting. But whatever it meant, it haunted Narcissus's entire life like a pop-up ad he could never quite close. You shift on the soft ground, moss tickling your arms. The pond beside you looks darker now, but still peaceful. Nothing dramatic has happened yet, but there's a stillness in the air, a hum, as if everything's holding its breath. The myth starts slow, like a dream. And maybe that's why it's stuck around so long, because all of us, in our own way, have peered into the water, wondering what we're really seeing. And just like that, your eyes drift back to that young man in the reflection. He hasn't noticed you yet. He's still just gazing, breathing, existing. Soon, he'll see something he shouldn't. But for now, everything is quiet. You're still lying there, half dreaming beside the pond, when the scenery begins to shimmer just slightly. Like your mind is stretching backward into an era before filters and freckle pens, when beauty was dangerous and occasionally fatal. That's right. You're about to walk through the ancient Greek rulebook for what made someone hot. And spoiler alert, it was a lot stricter than today's swipe-right culture. Narcissus isn't alone in being beautiful. But he's different because he somehow embodies the ideal. Not just good-looking in the hay, he's got nice hairway. More like if the gods sat around drawing their dream guy and accidentally manifested him into existence. You wander through the busy agora of Thebes, listening to whispers. Everyone's talking about him, old philosophers sipping watered-down wine, young women braiding each other's hair, jealous husbands pretending not to notice their wives sighing a little too loudly. No one had even seen him up close. He didn't exactly mingle. He was a myth even while he was alive. The Greeks were obsessed with kallikratia, this weird fusion of beauty and goodness. If you were beautiful, people just assumed you had a noble soul. If you were ugly, well, hope you were funny. But this belief led to a kind of collective blindness. No one really saw Narcissus. They just projected perfection onto him like a classroom PowerPoint. His personality? Irrelevant. His hobbies? Who cares? The jawline said it all. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek gymnasiums, places where young men trained completely naked, beauty competitions were a real thing. Like best thighs and most harmonious proportions were actual award categories. Narcissus probably would have swept. And he never even showed up. But why did he not show up? Why did he stay hidden, avoiding the spotlight? Everyone tried to shine on him. That's where things get a little less vogue and a little more therapy. Some scholars argue that Narcissus didn't love anyone because he didn't know how to relate to other people. Raised by a nymph and basically unsupervised by the river dad, maybe he just wasn't taught what love looked like. He just wandered the forests, quiet, detached, borderline feral in a very aesthetically pleasing way. You step into one of those wooded glades now, dappled with sunlight and cicadas humming in the trees. Somewhere, you imagine, Narcissus is hunting. Or maybe just listening to the wind. Every so often, a nymph might peek from behind a tree, hoping for eye contact. He never gives it. One particularly unlucky shepherd tried writing him a love poem. A whole scroll of it, delivered via doves. The myth doesn't say whether Narcissus read it, but considering the guy ended up crying into a thistle bush, the results were probably not great. This wasn't just unrequited love. This was a trail of emotional wreckage nymphs sobbing into waterfalls, boys dramatically throwing themselves off cliffs, a whole generation of ancient crushes that went absolutely nowhere. And yet, Narcissus wasn't cruel. That's the part people forget. He wasn't laughing at them. He wasn't stringing anyone along. He just wasn't interested. Or maybe wasn't capable. Fringe theory time. Some scholars actually believe Narcissus might have been coded as asexual or aromantic, a figure who didn't feel attraction the way others did. Of course, the Greeks wouldn't have used those words, but they did understand that some people just didn't want what others wanted. So maybe all this curse talk was really just society's way of punishing someone who didn't fit the template. Still, society tried. One story says that a scorned lover prayed to the gods, begging them to teach Narcissus what it felt like to love and be rejected. And somewhere up on Mount Olympus, a divine eyebrow was raised. Cue the slow turn of fate's wheel. Historians still argue whether this was Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, or Aphrodite herself, feeling slighted. Either way, a celestial group chat was opened, and the conclusion was clear. Narcissus needed to be humbled. Now here's something weird but real. The concept of Nemesis wasn't always about petty vengeance. Originally, it was cosmic balance correcting excess, restoring order. Narcissus's beauty was an excess. His isolation was a flaw. The punishment, then, wasn't about cruelty. It was about making the math work. You wander out of the trees and find yourself in a sunlit glade. The pond is here again, just as glossy and still. You feel the story coiling tighter. Something's coming. But for now, Narcissus is just living his life alone but unbothered, admired but untouched. He still hasn't seen the one reflection that will undo him. But the world around him is stirring, just a little. A nymph sighs in the distance. A god checks their divine watch. And you stay very still, listening for the ripple. The path under your feet softens now, less stone, more moss, like the earth itself wants you to tread quietly. You're deeper in the forest, away from cities and whispers and olive oil gossip. The trees are taller here, and this, right here, is where Narcissus' story actually begins, not at the pond, but in a prophecy uttered before he could walk. You kneel beside a trickling stream, the kind of place where myths are born. The air is cooler and the shadows flicker. Somewhere nearby, a nymph gives birth in silence. Her name is Liriope, a naiad, a freshwater spirit whose domain is the calm river Cephissus. She's ethereal, barely a shimmer in the air, more myth than mom, but fiercely protective. And she's just had a child with a god. Cephissus, the river god himself, isn't exactly dad of the year material. Like many of the Olympian-adjacent deities, he shows up when convenient and promptly evaporates into mist when responsibility knocks. So Liriope, left alone with a baby who radiates something, takes the sensible route and seeks guidance. Enter Tiresias, the blind prophet. Now, if Greek mythology had a Yelp page, Tiresias would be the top-rated oracle for cryptic one-liners. He's The one everyone visits when the vibes are weird, but clarity is nowhere in sight. And Tiresias famously doesn't sugarcoat. She cradles her glowing infant and asks, "Will he live a long life?" Tiresias, with that spooky calm of someone who's seen everything, replies, "Yes, if he never knows himself." That's it. No footnotes, no elaboration. Just a sentence that could mean 100 different things, none of them good. You sit with that line for a while, like it's carved in the bark beside you. If he never knows himself. It's a riddle and a sentence all at once. Historians still argue whether it referred to sexual awakening, ego, identity, or just a cosmic dare. Was it literal, like, don't ever look in a mirror, or metaphorical, the kind of thing therapists charge $200 an hour to unpack? Some versions of the myth suggest Liriope tried to protect him. She might have raised him away from his reflection. No polished surfaces, no pools deep enough to mirror. Just forest and quiet and hunting. And so Narcissus grew up. Alone, but not unloved. Trees watched him pass. Animals didn't startle at his step. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened like it was prophecy. He carried himself like someone who'd never been told he wasn't special. And maybe that was the problem. By the time he was 16, the forest had become a runway of sword snips trailing behind him like stray petals. Mortal boys leaving carved initials in tree trunks, hoping he'd notice. He never did. Or if he did, he never said anything. You step through a thicket and stumble into one of those love stories, the short kind. A mortal youth, name forgotten, had followed Narcissus for days, desperate just to be seen. He finally caught up, breathless and muddy, and declared his affection like it was an ancient monologue. And Narcissus? He turned, looked at him for a long, long moment, and said flatly, "You disgust me." That boy died shortly after. Not by Narcissus' hand, just ... from heartbreak, from shame. Some say he threw himself on a sword. Others say he wasted away beneath the trees. Now, here's the strange bit. From that boy's blood, a flower bloomed. Red, wild, unnamed. The forest took his pain and gave back something beautiful, like it always does in myths. Like it always shouldn't. In real life, you keep walking, the trees parting around you like theater curtains. There's an odd hush in the air, and you realize that you're nearing the moment everything starts to bend. You're close to the fateful encounter, not the pond. Not yet, but someone who'll change everything. You've heard of her. Her name echoes, literally echo. A mountain nymph with a voice like birdsong, doomed to repeat whatever she hears. But she doesn't appear just yet. She's waiting, just offstage, watching Narcissus like everyone else. But in this moment, in this section of story, it's still about him. About the weight of being adored and untouched. About a prophecy that hangs in the air like a storm cloud, and about a boy who walks through the forest, never wondering what he looks like, not yet. The sun slants lower through the trees now, casting long shadows that reach like fingers across the mossy trail. The birdsong thins, as if even the forest is bracing for what's coming. And somewhere, just a few glades over, a voice echoes. You hear it before you see her, playful, fragmented, like laughter bouncing down a hallway. You follow the sound, of course. You always do in stories like this. And there she is. Echo. She's perched on a rock, braiding flowers into her hair. That never stays put, by the way, as if the wind has some personal vendetta against her. She notices you, smiles faintly, then returns to watching him. Narcissus wandering nearby, bow slung lazily across his shoulder, not hunting so much as existing dramatically in a sunbeam. Echo is a mountain nymph, and she's been cursed. Not just cursed in the someone hexed my love life kind of way. No, she literally cannot speak her own thoughts. All she can do is repeat the last words spoken to her. It's punishment, courtesy of Hera, queen of the gods, and not exactly known for emotional flexibility. The story goes that Echo used to distract Hera with long, winding stories while Zeus Echo's real problem, if we're honest, slipped away to go seduce other nymphs. Hera caught on, rolled her celestial eyes, and cursed Echo to lose her voice, her agency, her ability to initiate anything. Echo could now only reflect, respond, never start. You sit beside her now, not speaking, just watching, because the moment's about to unfold, and it's one of those moments where the silence feels rehearsed. Narcissus steps into the clearing. He pauses, frowns slightly. Is anyone here? He calls out. Echo stiffens. Her whole being shudders with the effort of not answering too early. She waits. He calls again. Hello? And then quietly, sweetly, like a moth brushing against your ear, she replies, hello. He turns, puzzled. Come to me. Come to me, she says, stepping forward, hope blazing in her eyes like the last spark on a matchstick. And when she tries to hug him, he recoils. He's confused, possibly startled, but not cruel. At least not intentionally. What are you doing? He asks. Echo, helplessly, repeats, doing. It's a heartbreak in slow motion. She reaches again, and he steps back, shakes his head, says something cutting, something like, I'd rather die than let you love me. And Echo, frozen in place, can only whisper, love me. She doesn't die, not exactly. That would be too clean. Instead, she wastes away, voice by voice, syllable by syllable, until only her echo remains, hiding in caves, repeating what others say, never saying what she means. Fringe fact for you. This myth is why the phenomenon of sound reflection is called echo. But what people forget is that it was once a name, a person, a girl who could only mirror what she was given. Historians still argue whether Echo was meant to represent the role of women in Greek society, silent, reactive, defined by others, or if she was just a poetic device. But the ache she leaves behind? That's real. You stand now, brushing pine needles off your knees. Echo is gone, or maybe she never fully was. And Narcissus? He moves on, doesn't think twice. Maybe he regrets nothing. Maybe he never noticed, but the gods noticed. Remember that boy from earlier, the one who died when Narcissus rejected him? The one whose spilled heartbreak grew into a crimson flower. His final prayer had been simple: may he fall in love and never obtain what he desires. The gods, who often ignore world wars and family drama, but never ignore a poetically satisfying curse, were listening, and somewhere in the divine bureaucracy, a decision was made. You step out of the clearing. The wind hushes. Everything narrows. The next time Narcissus stops to drink water, he'll see something he's never seen before himself. The forest around you stills, like it's holding its breath. Somewhere in the undergrowth, a deer lifts its head, ears twitching. Even the cicadas pause mid-chirp. Because this is the moment everything bends. You follow Narcissus down a winding trail, his feet barely making a sound on the moss-covered earth. He's not in a rush. He never is. Why would he be? The world seems to part for him on its own. Flowers bloom where he steps. Sunlight waits patiently to hit his cheekbones at just the right angle, but there's something different in his expression now. A flicker of something tired or curious, or just off. Maybe Echo's presence lingers like a song that won't stop playing in the back of his mind. Maybe the world feels a little heavier than usual. He reaches a clearing, and there it is. The pond, still as glass, framed in reeds and forget-me-nots. Not large, not dramatic. Just a pool of water so still, so perfectly polished, it looks like the gods themselves ironed it with Olympus-grade serenity. He kneels, and finally, he looks at first. He startles, maybe thinking it's someone else. His eyes narrow. He leans closer, but the face leans too, moves when he moves, smiles when he smiles, furrows its brow just like him. It takes a few seconds, but then, slowly, you watch him understand. It's him, and he can't look away. The water ripples faintly under his breath, but the image remains. And as he stares, something begins to bloom in his chest, a feeling that's entirely new. Not admiration, not pride. Something warmer, something aching. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed in the concept of mirror souls, that seeing your reflection too clearly could be dangerous, even spiritually destabilizing. Mirrors were sometimes buried with the dead or covered during mourning to prevent the soul from getting trapped inside. Narcissus at this moment is looking into a very ancient fear. He tilts his head, the reflection tilts. He smiles again, so softly, and the face returns it just as soft. And in that moment, the trap snaps shut. He doesn't blink. He doesn't breathe. Now, some versions of the myth insist he understood it was his own face. That he fell in love not with another, but with himself. Others claim he didn't know, that he truly believed the pond had gifted him a mysterious, silent companion. Someone perfect. Someone beautiful. Someone always just out of reach. Historians still argue whether Narcissus's love was vanity or loneliness, taken to its final form. Was it obsession with his own perfection, or a desperate wish for connection so overwhelming that he projected it onto the only face that didn't ask anything of him? Fringe tidbit time. One obscure Roman poet once wrote that Narcissus spoke to his reflection as if it were a lover. "Stay," he begged. "Don't leave me." He cupped the water in his hands, tried to kiss it, only to watch the face vanish every time. Over and over, until his lips were raw from trying. He forgets to eat, to sleep, to leave. Day becomes night. Night becomes day. You sit with him for both, the pond glowing silver under moonlight and golden under sunrise. Time folds in on itself, lazy and indifferent. Birds come and go. Seasons shift slightly. But Narcissus remains. Now, here's the part most people get wrong. He doesn't die of vanity. He dies of heartbreak. Because every time he tries to touch the one he loves, the water betrays him. Every time he leans closer, the image dissolves. He begins to speak to it, softly, reverently. Why do you turn away when I reach for you? Why can't I hold you? You are perfect, and I am nothing without you. The reflection says nothing, just watches. Eventually, Narcissus lies down beside the pool, head resting on the moss. He doesn't cry, or scream, or curse the Balodi. He just watches and fades. One day, you notice the space he filled is empty. There's no body, no sound, only a flower, small, white, petals curled slightly at the tips, bending toward the very water he once loved, the narcissus flower. Born from longing, from beauty turned in on itself like a folding knife dot, and if you lean down close, very close, you might still hear him, not speaking, not calling, just breathing gently through the petals. Still watching, still waiting. You sit by the pond for a while longer, knees pulled to your chest, as the stillness sinks in like mist clinging to your skin. The flower barely sways in the breeze, like it too, knows the story is not done yet. Because while Narcissus has vanished, his story echoes more than echo ever could. You start to notice something curious. People keep visiting this spot. Pilgrims of heartbreak, travelers with tired eyes, poets with half-scribbled verses tucked in their sleeves. They come looking for something, beauty, truth, maybe even themselves. And they leave changed. This place, once just a forest clearing, becomes a shrine. It's quiet, peaceful, but there's a tinge of sadness baked into the moss now, like the ground remembers. And what happens next? Well, the gods do what gods often do, turn tragedy into legend. Zeus, or maybe Apollo, depending on which scroll you're reading, looks down and thinks, this'll make a great cautionary tale. So they immortalize Narcissus not just in bloom but in metaphor, a symbol, a lesson wrapped in petals. And so the word narcissism is born. Let's pause here for a mainstream historical fact. The term narcissism wasn't coined until the early 20th century by psychoanalyst Paul Neck and later popularized by Freud himself. They used it to describe a self-absorbed personality, someone unable to love others because they're too fixated on themselves. It became a pillar of modern psychology. But here's the thing, they pulled it directly from this myth. From a pond, from a boy who couldn't look away. But the original Narcissus, he wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't flexing in front of bronze mirrors or writing passive-aggressive marble inscriptions about his exes. He was quiet and alone and tired. So here's the twist no one wants to admit. Narcissus might not have loved himself at all. What if he was seeing himself for the first time and didn't recognize who he had become? What if that still pond became a mirror too clear, showing not beauty but isolation? There's a fringe theory floated by some fringe scholars, people who write dusty footnotes and stay up all night, arguing with scrolls, that Narcissus was never meant to be a warning about arrogance. He was a warning about neglect, about never being taught how to connect, about growing up adored but untouched, praised but never known. He wasn't punished for loving himself. He was punished for not knowing. How Echo still wanders nearby, though no one sees her. She repeats what she hears still. Sometimes when the wind rustles through the leaves, you hear your own thoughts whispered back to you. That's her, Echo, watching, repeating. She never got closure. neither did he. But the flower remains. The narcissus. It sprouts in spring and bows its head gently, as if in mourning. In many cultures, it's now a symbol of rebirth and renewal. In others, it's tied to vanity and doom. It depends on how you look at it, how you look into it. Kind of like Narcissus himself. You stand now, brushing dirt from your palms. The clearing is starting to fade into shadow again. But you know you'll remember this place. Not because of the tragedy, or the myth, or the flower, but because of the stillness. Because of what it revealed. It's almost funny, isn't it? The boy who was never seen was finally destroyed by a glimpse of himself. And the rest of us? We've been staring into that same pond ever since. You leave the clearing, stepping lightly over roots and soft moss. But the image of that pond, the stillness of it, the ache it held, sticks with you like dew on your skin. You think you've moved on, but Narcissus's reflection isn't done with you yet. Not by a long shot, because his story didn't end with the flower. Oh no, that was just the seed. You walk along a worn path now, one travelers before you have taken philosophers, playwrights, old poets with creaky knees and ink-stained robes. They all came here, drawn by the pull of that strange, silent boy in the water. Take Socrates, for instance, our friendly neighborhood thinker. He didn't write anything down himself, lazy or genius. You decide, but his student Plato sure did. And in one of those classic Athenian dialogues where everyone's reclining dramatically at a symposium, the idea of self-love comes up. Not in a treat yourself kind of way, but in that heavy, soul-sorting, how much of you is truly yours way. Some of them saw Narcissus not as a villain, but as a mirror, literally. A test. A question. What do you see when you look at yourself? That's your mainstream historical fact right there. Greek thinkers often used myths like Narcissus to explore the tension between loving the self and losing the self. Plato even suggested that true beauty wasn't in the flesh, but in the mind, in the soul. Which is a nice idea until you remember Plato probably would have swiped left on every single profile pic. The story of Narcissus became theater material. 2. The ancient playwrights loved a good tragedy, and they knew a juicy metaphor when they saw one. In their hands, Narcissus became a symbol of hubris, of divine punishment, of what happens when the soul curls in on itself like a burnt scroll. But not everyone agreed, and here's your fringe tidbit. In some minor variations of the myth version scrawled in the margins of dusty manuscripts, Narcissus doesn't die, he's saved. Pulled from the water by Artemis or Pan or even Echo, given a second chance to love someone other than himself. These tellings never caught on. Too hopeful, too neat. The ancients preferred their stories with a sting. Still, the possibility lingers. Historians still argue whether the myth was ever meant to end in death. Some believe the flower was an ancient symbol of reincarnation, not demise. That Narcissus wasn't lost to the pond. He transformed into something else, something softer. A reminder, not a warning. You stop now at a small shrine crumbled, forgotten, nestled under the roots of an olive tree. It's old, maybe even ancient. The stone is etched with a barely visible carving, a face looking into water. No name, just the shape of longing. Offerings lie nearby smooth pebbles, folded scraps of paper, little mirrors cracked down the center. People still come here, it seems. They still whisper to him. Maybe because they see something of themselves in his. Fate, because here's the uncomfortable truth the myth leaves behind. We're all a little bit Narcissus. Every time we check our reflection in a cafe window. Every time we hover over a social media post, rereading our own caption. Every time we stare too long into a screen, hoping anyone will tell us we're enough. And every time we forget to ask who we're really trying to impress. It's not vanity. It's longing. The same longing that wrapped around Echo and squeezed her into silence. The same longing that pulled Narcissus toward the water and left him staring. You walk on now, away from the shrine, through a grove of laurels and myrtle. The sun is warm on your back. A breeze rustles through the branches, and for a moment, you hear your own name whispered faintly, or maybe not. Maybe it's just Echo again, still listening, still repeating, still waiting for someone to say something new. You drift farther from the shrine, your steps slow, almost reluctant, like the story's rhythm has settled into your bones and doesn't want to let go just yet. The forest light filters softer now, more golden than bright, as though even the sun has begun its descent into thought. And there's a question tugging gently at you, persistent as a pebble in your shoe. Why did this myth last? Why, of all the tales of gods and monsters and far grander tragedies, did this quiet boy by a pond echo across centuries? You enter a sun-dappled glade, and something about it feels almost theatrical. You half expect a toga-clad philosopher to emerge from behind a laurel bush, pontificating with wine in one hand and a tragic scroll in the other. But no, it's just you and the hum of insects, the hush of leaves. Let's be clear. Ancient Greek myths were not just stories. They were social blueprints, value systems in disguise. And Narcissus? He became a morality tale, a sort of mythological do-not-enter sign hung above the ego. Your mainstream historical fact? In classical education throughout ancient Greece and Rome, Narcissus was commonly taught alongside figures like Icarus and Phaethon, youthful, beautiful, and doomed. They were the trifecta of tragic boys who flew too high, burned too bright, or, in Narcissus's case, looked too long. But here's what they don't tell you in the marble halls. Unlike Icarus, who defied his father, or Phaethon, who defied the gods, Narcissus didn't do anything. He didn't fly, he didn't steal, he didn't burn. He stopped. That's all. Stopped walking, stopped reaching, just stared. Which, frankly, feels very relatable on a Sunday afternoon when your brain short-circuits and all you can do is doom scroll. Through your own face, you pause near a fallen log where someone once scratched a line in the bark, faint, faded, but legible. To see yourself too clearly is a kind of blindness. Chilling, right? Let's get weird now. Fringe tidbit incoming. Some mystics in the Hellenistic era believed the myth of Narcissus was not about love or vanity at all, but about initiation. That the pool was a portal, and Narcissus wasn't lost, he crossed into another realm. The flower was a symbol not of death, but of transformation, like the chrysalis that turns to dust just before the butterfly wakes. These mystics were all about inward journeys, and they claimed the face Narcissus saw in the water wasn't his reflection, it was his daimon, his soul's divine twin. And when he leaned in to understand it, he dissolved into it. Not tragedy, transcendence, of course, Most modern scholars scoff at this. That's not what Ovid meant, they say. It's allegory. It's a warning. But historians still argue whether the Narcissus myth had a more esoteric origin, one buried beneath Roman moralism and Christian guilt. Was he a sinner or a seeker? A fool or a mystic who stared too deep? Here's the rub. It depends on where you stand at the pond's edge. And it's about ego. Stand a few steps back, and it's about longing. Step even farther, and maybe it's about knowing yourself too well, and not at all. You find yourself near water again, but this one's different. A slow stream this time, with silver minnows darting just beneath the surface. You bend down and catch your reflection, hair tousled, eyes tired. Maybe even a little wiser than when the walk began. And for a split second, you get it. Not the myth. Not the moral. The feeling. That pull. That quiet magnetism of your own face. Not because it's beautiful, but because it's yours. Because it's the one face that's been with you through every moment, awkward, glorious, lonely, kind. And still, somehow, it surprises you. You blink. The ripples distort the image, and then it's gone, but not forgotten. You stand up, dust your hands, and walk again, a little slower, a little softer, because now you're not just moving through the forest, you're moving through story, through time. Through Narcissus' gaze and your own. The path narrows now, threading between tall cypress trees that lean just slightly, like they're listening in. The air is cooler here, touched with the faint scent of crushed pine needles and old stone. As you walk, the sound of water fades behind you, but its memory clings like Narcissus's gaze still tugging gently at your heels. You find yourself wondering, what happened to Echo after all that? Poor, poor Echo, overshadowed, reduced to background noise literally. Her story feels like a subplot, something you'd almost skip over in favor of the main character's arc. But once you look closer, it becomes painfully clear. Her heartbreak is the most human part of the entire myth. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Echo's origin isn't just tied to Narcissus. In earlier versions, especially in Roman mythology as told by Ovid, Echo was a nymph cursed by Hera. Why? Because she talked too much. Or more precisely, because she distracted Hera with stories while Zeus sneaked off to. Well, let's just say Zeus was being Zeus. Hera, not a fan of girl bosses aiding her philandering husband, cursed Echo to only repeat the last words spoken to her. It's poetic injustice. A voice that once charmed gods, reduced to empty mimicry. And after Narcissus rejects her coldly, firmly, Echo doesn't scream. She doesn't fight. She simply fades. Literally. Into caves, into breezes, into repetition. And you can't help but think, walking under these silent trees, that Echo is everywhere now. Every time you hear your own voice bounce back from a canyon or an empty hallway, that's her. Trapped in the margins of a story she didn't ask to be part of. But here's a fringe tidbit that doesn't make it into most versions. In certain rural Greek oral traditions, Echo isn't a victim. She's a spirit guide, a kind of forest oracle. Locals would whisper questions into hollows, listening for her reply not as mimicry but as metaphor, as prophecy. Echo, in this telling, chose to remain in the earth, to echo back truth in the chastened voice of those who dare to ask. Historians still argue whether Echo and Narcissus were ever meant to be read as a romantic tragedy or a metaphysical metaphor? Were they opposites? Soulmates? Mirror images? Some scholars argue that Echo represents humanity's longing for connection, while Narcissus represents our failure to return it. And in that way, they're both punished. You reach a fork in the path. One trail curves uphill toward a stony ridge. The other dips down into shadow. You take the darker path instinctively, because this story isn't finished with its haunting just yet. As the trees close in tighter, it becomes hard to tell whether the whisper you hear is wind or echo, maybe both, because here's a thought that settles into your chest like a pebble dropped into still water. Echo didn't love Narcissus because he was beautiful. She loved him because he was unreachable, because he never demanded anything from her. And perhaps, in a world where everyone wanted to take, that felt like safety. And Narcissus? He didn't reject Echo because she was unworthy. He rejected her because he couldn't hear himself in her voice. All she could do was reflect. And reflection, well, that's always been his problem. You stop beside a fallen tree, moss thick over the bark. You sit, and you listen. Silence. Then soft, nearly imperceptible, your own breath, returning to you. Echo. Still here, still hoping someone, someday, might ask something new. The forest shifts again, subtly. The shadows soften, the underbrush thins, and for a while you forget you're tracing the ruins of a myth. You're just walking quiet, steady, maybe even a little sad. But it's the kind of sadness that hums, like a lullaby, not a scream. The kind that helps you remember you're still here. You come across a weathered stone bench nestled beside a dry spring. Maybe it once bubbled with clear water, a cousin to that still pool Narcissus once haunted. Now it's cracked and empty, just a hollow memory of something that used to reflect. You sit again. And here's the strange part. You almost feel like he's nearby. Not the beautiful boy with the perfect jawline. No, that version has long since withered with the daffodils. What you feel now is quieter, softer, the essence of Narcissus. Less a person, more a question, because we still haven't answered it, have we? Was he cursed, or just misunderstood? Time for your mainstream historical fact. In Roman society, particularly under Stoic philosophers like Seneca, self-obsession was seen as a moral failing, evidence of spiritual decay. Narcissus' story fit perfectly with these values. Vanity wasn't just unattractive, it was dangerous. It turned you inward when you were supposed to serve the Republic. To love yourself too much was to forget your place in the greater order. But we modern folk, we live in a very different world. Self-love is practically a survival skill now. You're told to affirm yourself in the mirror, to take selfies, to say I am enough, until your reflection nods back. So what if Narcissus wasn't vain? What if he was healing? Here's your fringe tidbit. In some Renaissance reinterpretations, particularly among 16th century alchemists, Narcissus wasn't seen as a warning at all. He was a symbol of inner work. Looking into the water wasn't about ego. It was about revelation, about confronting the self so fully that the ego burned away and only truth remained. Yes, that's real. There were actual alchemists who claimed Narcissus represented the Negredo stage, the blackening when you're false. Identity dissolves before rebirth. Heavy stuff for a guy who just wanted to get hydrated, right? But it reframes everything. Historians still argue whether this version of Narcissus, a seeker, not a sinner, holds any textual merit, or if it's just poetic projection from later centuries trying to rehabilitate a myth that always felt a little too cruel. After all, isn't it strange that a boy who loved his reflection becomes a byword for arrogance, but a god who turned into a swan to seduce mortals somehow gets a pass? You tilt your head at that thought, because now, sitting by this dry spring, you can't help but see the imbalance. Narcissus didn't start the war, didn't slay the monster, didn't defend the gods. He just looked, and looking, apparently, was enough to doom him. But maybe that's what makes his myth stick. Not because it's grand, but because it's small, personal, a moment frozen in time like a fly in amber, just a boy, a pond, and the unbearable gravity of seeing yourself. You stand again, your legs tingling slightly from stillness. The trail ahead is soft and narrow. You walk slowly, as if your own reflection might be hiding in the next bend. And as you go, the myth loosens its grip a little, not vanishing, just quieting. You've heard the tragedy, felt the pull, seen the pond. Now, you carry it with you, not as a warning, but as a mirror. The path turns rocky now, like the forest is shedding its softness for something sharper. You step carefully, the solace of your feet adjusting to the uneven rhythm. Gravel crunches, pine cones snap underfoot, and every so often, a lizard darts across the sun-warmed stones, startling in their speed, then gone like dreams at dawn. You don't mind the shift. You're deep enough into the story now that even discomfort feels familiar, like a necessary detour before you circle back to something tender. And it's time we circle back to that flower, the Narcissus. You've probably seen it modest, pale yellow or white, the petals flaring softly around a little trumpet of a center. It grows everywhere, in suburban flower beds, in wild meadows, on greeting cards that say, "Spring is here," without an ounce of mythic baggage. But it wasn't always so ordinary. Your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, the Narcissus was associated with both beauty and death. It was sacred to Demeter, the goddess of harvest, and also to Hades, god of the underworld. That duality made it a powerful symbol, a flower that lured Persephone to the earth's depths, and one that marked the grave of Narcissus himself. In other words, this is not your basic Instagram bloom. This is a flower of portals. And here's a strange fringe tidbit. Certain Hellenistic poets believed the Narcissus flower had mild narcotic properties. Not scientifically true, but they insisted its fragrance could lull you into a dreamlike stupor, a botanical hypnosis. One second-century philosopher even wrote that a field of Narcissus was a veil between this world and the next. Now imagine Narcissus kneeling beside that pond, surrounded by hundreds of them, drowsy with their scent, lost not just in the reflection, but in the space between life and myth, identity and oblivion. You pass a field, now real, this time just soft grass waving in the late breeze. But for a heartbeat, you imagine the yellow flowers, hundreds of them, nodding as one, watching you, or maybe just waiting. Historians still argue whether the placement of Narcissus' transformation, where exactly he turned into a flower, matters. Was it on sacred land, a cursed grove, or just some nameless spot beside still water? Ovid, of course, is vague, but there are enough regional retellings across Boeotia, Thessaly, even Cyprus to suggest the site mattered. That maybe people went there, quietly, year after year, to see if the flower still grew. You wonder what they hoped to find: proof, closure, or maybe themselves. Because let's be honest, myths don't last because they're flashy. They last because they feel true, even when we know they aren't. Because sometimes you do look at your own face and feel a pang of confusion. Sometimes you do hear your voice echo back with nothing new to say. Sometimes you do sit beside your own reflection and forget how to move forward. And in that moment, however fleeting, you are Narcissus. Not cursed, not arrogant, just still. You reach the top of a low ridge where the sky opens wide above you. Pale blue now, with the first streaks of lavender at the edges. Twilight is coming, the hour where outlines blur and your shadow stretches long across the ground like it's trying to tell you something. And somewhere beneath your ribs, you feel the ache of recognition. You followed him this far, not because he was famous, or beautiful, or tragic, but because he's familiar, because you, too, have stared too long, and maybe, just maybe, you needed someone to remind you it's okay to look away. You descend slowly from the ridge, where the light fades just a touch quicker. Each step seems to dissolve into dusk. You don't rush it. After all, this isn't a sprint, it's a long unraveling. Like pulling a single thread from a tapestry, woven thousands of years ago. And you're careful not to snap it. The story of Narcissus by now is worn smooth in your hands. You've held every angle, peered into every reflection. But one image lingers stubbornly at the edge of it all. The moment of transformation. You know the myth. Narcissus, unable to leave his reflection, eventually wastes away. Some versions say he falls into the water, consumed. Others insist he stays. Still for so long the gods, in pity or punishment, turn him into a flower. Either way, the result is the same. A boy becomes a blossom. Your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek literature is full of metamorphosis myths. They loved a good transformation. Daphne turns into a laurel to escape Apollo. Arachne becomes a spider after besting Athena at weaving. It was a way to explain natural phenomena and inject drama into morality tales. But Narcissus stands apart. His metamorphosis isn't active. He doesn't flee, doesn't fight. He simply withers. And that passivity, well, it's uncomfortable. We want our protagonists to do something, not just gaze, not just fade. But that's what he does. And here's the odd little fringe tidbit. In one obscure Byzantine retelling, Narcissus never transforms at all. Instead, the pond itself vanishes overnight, and the villagers who find him weeping by the empty basin assume he's been cursed. So they plant a narcissus flower beside him, hoping it will cheer him up. He dies anyway. It's brutal, but also strangely gentle. Historians still argue whether the myth of Narcissus originally included the transformation, or if it was a poetic flourish added centuries later, most likely by Roman poets seeking a cleaner ending. Earlier Greek fragments suggest a more open-ended tale, where Narcissus disappears into the wilderness, still staring, never found. An eternal question with no satisfying answer. And maybe that's better, because here's what the flower doesn't tell you. It's not a resolution. It's not peace. It's a placeholder. A soft bookmark in the soil where a person once sat too still, You move again, your fingers brushing tree trunks as you pass. The bark feels real, grounding. The night insects have started their chorus of fuzzy, droning soundtrack that makes your bones feel heavy and your thoughts feel far away. And in this softened world, you wonder, what if the story is not about vanity or punishment at all? What if it's about recognition? The kind of soul-deep seeing that breaks something loose. Not the gaze of ego, but the shock of clarity. Seeing yourself, maybe for the first time, and realizing how small and sacred you really are. There's something brave about that. Even if it ends in silence, you come to a wooden bridge, narrow and curved like a spine. Below it, a dry ravine yawns open, moonlight just beginning to gather at the bottom. You cross slowly, every footstep echoing just slightly echo still with you, and perhaps she's the final witness to his story. The only one who stayed, because if you really think about it, Narcissus isn't remembered because he was beautiful. He's remembered because he looked. And in a world that rarely allows time for stillness, for self-confrontation, for silence, that's kind of heroic. The path now is softer, like walking through a half-forgotten dream. Pine needles carpet the trail, muffling your steps. The breeze grows gentler, tugging lightly at your sleeves, like it's trying to say, "You've come far enough. Just rest." But there's still one thread left in this old tapestry, the question that hums beneath every retelling, every academic paper, every fireside version told to children. Why did the gods care so much? Seriously, why would divine beings concern themselves with a pretty boy who liked his own face? Your mainstream historical fact. In Greek mythology, divine intervention is rarely fair or proportionate. Gods meddled constantly in mortal lives over jealousy, revenge, boredom. Arachne was turned into a spider for weaving better than Athena. Niobe lost all her children because she bragged about having more kids than lettuce. Hubris wasn't just frowned upon, it was fatal. In that sense, Narcissus' fate follows tradition. He was warned, ignored divine instruction, and suffered the consequences. But here's a twist. Narcissus didn't exactly boast. He didn't climb Mount Olympus shouting, "I'm the hottest thing since molten bronze." He didn't claim godhood, didn't start a cult of one. He just looked. So what crime did he commit? Here's your fringe tidbit. Some esoteric scholars, especially in Gnostic interpretations, suggest the gods were threatened by Narcissus because he saw the divine within himself. They claim his reflection wasn't just physical beauty, it was cosmic recognition. He looked into the water and saw not just his face, but his essence. And that, to jealous gods, was intolerable. Too much self-knowledge is dangerous. Too much autonomy? Even more so. Historians still argue whether this interpretation holds any real weight. Traditionalists insist Narcissus was a morality fable, nothing more. But fringe philosophers and mystics read between the lines, seeing in him a caution not against vanity, but against awakening. And that, you have to admit, is deliciously spooky, because if you look around this quiet forest, now this strange, liminal space that swallowed time and myth and thought, you begin to notice, there are no gods here. No Zeus thundering from above. No Artemis prowling the shadows. Just the lingering presence of mortals who look too closely, love too deeply, faded too softly. You stop walking. There's a small stone on the side of the trail, flat, moss-covered. And curiously, warm Dot, you sit on it, listening to the slow chorus of the woods around you, Dot. It's not dramatic. There's no voice from the heavens. No boom of divine punishment, Dot, just stillness. And that's when it clicks. Maybe Narcissus didn't die at the pond, Dot. Maybe he lived somewhere deep in the quiet places, the places we're afraid to go. The places where we meet our own gaze, uninterrupted. Where the noise stops. Where you don't need validation, applause, or even an audience. You just need a moment of recognition. You are here. You are enough. You see yourself. And that is sacred. The gods didn't like that, of course. That kind of inner light is hard to control, harder to punish. So they rewrote his ending, turned his stillness into tragedy, made his flower a tombstone, not a torch. But tonight, sitting here, you know better. You know he looked not with pride, but with wonder. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. The forest is velvet now. Not black, not yet, but dim enough that every shadow feels like a secret. Your breath fogs gently, even though the air isn't cold. It's the kind of moment that softens edges, that blurs timelines where myth and memory lean into each other and whisper. You keep walking, even though it feels like the story should be over. But that's the trick of it. Some tales don't end cleanly. They taper off. They echo, like this one, because there's still one more figure in the Narcissus myth who deserves your attention. Echo. Remember her? The nymph cursed to only repeat the last words she hears. In most versions, she fades quietly into the mountains after Narcissus rejects her. Her body dissolves, but her voice remains forever repeating, never initiating. It's poetic. It's tragic. It's also maddening. Your mainstream historical fact. Echo's story predates Narcissus's in many oral traditions. She was once a forest deity in her own right, linked to sound, caves, and the resonance of nature. The Romans repurposed her to emphasize feminine silence and obedience, reflecting broader cultural shifts in how women were expected to behave. She became a narrative device, background noise to Narcissus's foreground drama. But that's not fair to her, is it? Because here's the fringe tidbit. In one alternative Orphic fragment, Echo's curse is broken after Narcissus dies. She regains her voice, but only temporarily, and sings a mourning song so beautiful that the gods are moved to silence. For a moment, the world stills to listen. Historians still argue whether this fragment is authentic or a later interpolation. From early Christian allegory, Echo as the soul mourning divine separation. But whether it's ancient or adapted, it offers a powerful shift in perspective. Maybe she wasn't just an accessory to Narcissus's downfall. Maybe she was his witness. The only one who truly understood his silence, because she lived with silence. As you walk, you start to hear it, a soft rhythm among the trees, not birdsong, not wind. Something deeper, layered, almost like your footsteps are being answered. Not echoed exactly, but harmonized. And then, quite suddenly, you understand something. Maybe the myth didn't end with a flower. Maybe it ended with a voice. Yours. Because like Echo, you've followed this story without steering it. You've absorbed the fragments, repeated the questions, lingered at the edge of reflection. But now, Maybe it's your turn to speak, to interpret, to create. Because every time someone retells the myth of Narcissus, it changes just a little. Softens here, sharpens there. We shave down the cruelty or magnify the lesson. We sculpt his face again, then smash the sculpture, then build a new one from memory. And we whisper his name quietly. Like we're afraid it still holds power. Narcissus. The cha. One who looked, the one who saw, the one who didn't look away. You pause beneath a tall tree, its bark spiraling like twisted rope, and rest your hand against it. It feels solid, present, like it's been listening all along. Maybe that's what myths are for, not to instruct, not to scold, but to listen. To let you walk through them, touch their edges, and decide for yourself what they mean. You've nearly reached the edge of the forest now. You can see the faint glow of a path, maybe even a village in the distance. The story is almost done, but Echo's voice lingers. Soft, subtle, almost yours. And you realize, as you step into the moonlight, sometimes the echo outlives the mirror. You cross the final stretch of the trail with steps slow and deliberate. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because you know instinctively that this part should be savored. The world has quieted around you. Even the insects, those relentless nighttime narrators, seem to hold their breath. Like they, too, are waiting for the last line. The tree's thin. The pond is long behind you. But in your chest, a strange echo lingers, more emotional than audible. Something between a sigh and a memory. And now it's time to answer the unspoken question. Why this myth? Why does the story of a boy who stared at his own reflection persist after thousands of years, whispered from scholar to storyteller, passed down like a stone smoothed by generations? You stop at the forest's edge. Beyond, the moonlight spills across open grass like silver ink across paper. And in that stillness, the final pieces click into place. You've heard so many versions now. In some, Narcissus is punished. In others, pitied. Occasionally, understood. And then there's this one, yours. The version you've walked with, listened to, breathed into the quiet folds of night. It isn't about vanity. It's about identity. Your mainstream historical fact to ground this. Renaissance artists loved Narcissus not just for the poetic imagery, but because his story symbolized the human pursuit of self-awareness. Caravaggio's famous painting shows him not with pride, but with tenderness. He gazes not like a man who loves himself, but like one trying to understand what he's seeing, and that at its core is all any of us really do. But let's add something strange now. Here's your final quirky tidbit. There's a tiny lunar crater named Narcissus. Yes, really, tucked quietly on the moon's far side, barely visible even through detailed telescopes. It's not grand, not dramatic, but it's there. Just like the myth, just like you. Historians still argue whether this naming was poetic or arbitrary. But here you are, standing beneath the very moon that holds it. And somehow it feels right, fitting, full circle. Because here's the quiet truth. We are all mirrors. And sometimes, when we're lucky or lonely, we meet our own gaze in a way that feels like falling in love. Not the loud cinematic kind, but the soft, aching realization that you've spent most of your life looking outward, and almost none looking in, and when you finally do, it changes everything. You cross into the clearing, There's no THUNDERCL ape. No transformation. Just you. Still. Walking. Still whole. Still wondering. And somewhere, just beyond the trees, the narcissus flowers bloom. Not as punishment. Not as warning. But as memory. As witness. As quiet proof that once someone stopped long enough to truly see himself, and in doing so allowed us to do the same. So now, as the last branches close behind you and the moon tilts higher in the sky, the story softens, the details blur, the boy fades, the pond stills, but something of him, of you, remains. Let the sounds grow fainter now. Let the woods, once so alive with myth, return to simple nighttime silence. Let each breath you take draw a little slower, a little deeper. You've wandered through reflection and shadow, followed echoes and questions, held ancient words in your hands. And none of them asked for answers, just that you stay long enough to wonder. Let the path beneath you dissolve now into a pillow of thought, into the quiet rhythm of rest. Let the pond become just water again. Let Narcissus become just a name. Let echo be the hush that follows your final thought. And if, in your dreams tonight, you glimpse the outline of a boy kneeling beside still water, don't fear for him. He's not trapped. He's just listening. And maybe he hears you. Sleep now. The story is finished. The forest has closed. The mirror is quiet. And your reflection is safe.